Really easy to be a prude when you're not attracted to him, isn't it?
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych Podcast, where psychology meets film. I am your host, as always, Dr. Alex Swan, and today's episode, is going to be, I think, a really fun conversation for two reasons. One, the movie that we're doing is a satirical look at a very heavy subject. And it's got some good messages in it. And I think we're going to have let's call it a really productive conversation by getting to use a fictional film. My guest hosts are amazing on this front. Anyways, the film is called But I'm a Cheerleader. Now, you may not be familiar with that film. Very indie film. A lot of big names, I gotta say. A lot of big names. Sort of a sleeper hit, I would say. Or maybe not. I guess maybe I can't call it a hit. But definitely a sleeper indie picture. But a lot of names that you would recognize as I rattle them off. So coming off of the high of American Pie, this film stars a young Natasha Lyonne. I'm not entirely sure how her last name is pronounced. But it was directed, so she's the star of the movie. She's the cheerleader in the title. That's who she is. The movie was directed by Jamie Babbitt and written by Brian Peterson and Jamie Babbitt as well. Other names connected to the film, acting-wise, Clea Duvall is the other main character-ish, a sort of secondary character, but love interest of the movie. Michelle Williams in a very small role, but I guess around the time that she was doing Dawson's Creek, so I guess people might have known her. Bud Cort in it as a member at the essentially the anti-gay camp that we'll go into. RuPaul as RuPaul Charles, credited as RuPaul Charles, was in this movie with a goatee, I might add. And then Melanie Linsky, she's been in a lot of stuff, but my favorite is the sort of villain of the story, the leader of this anti-gay camp, played by Kathy Moriarty. And essentially, Kathy Moriarty was my introduction to the characterization of evil women, because she is I guess we'll say, the main antagonist in Casper, the Friendly Ghost, that movie that had a 3D Casper. He becomes a real boy. She's the antagonist in that movie, and it was good to see her again in that role, because her raspy voice really plays that really well. Just one other thing, Rufio is in it as well. Yeah, people of a certain age will get that reference. So we got a lot to talk about in this episode. So I am going to kick it to the guests. My guest hosts today are Doctors Molly Metz and Will Ryan. Both have been on the show once before, and I thought they'd be fun to have on together, mainly because they are my besties, and they are married, so they do live together. It's just double mint gum kind of episode. Welcome back to the show, you two.
Thank you, Alex. It's nice to be back. Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Of course, a horse, of course. I am happy to have you both back on the show. So both of you, and since you've been on the show at different times, Molly, it's been like almost 2 years, I think, or maybe even more than 2. And then I believe, Will, your episode was last year, but I could be wrong about that because time really does move very fast and slow at this moment. So I don't know.
Time is meaningless.
What is happening? Exactly. So we all learned, I should say, that when you were on your first show, that you're both teaching stream professors at the University of Toronto in the big old city there. And so what I'd like you to do for the listeners is to just quickly remind us what sort of research and teaching you do at U of T.
Yeah, so I am in finishing up my 5th year at U of T. I'm a social psychologist by training, but in my role as a teaching stream prof, that means I mostly focus on undergrad education. And so I'm lucky and get to teach the ginormous statistics and research methods courses there. And just because of the way scheduling has worked over the last few years, I have had 85% of our program has gone through my classes because I've been tackling most of the stats courses. So they all know me.
That's good. I like
that. Luckily, I also teach upper level relationships and emotion classes that they usually are way more intrinsically motivated to be in. So it's a nice change of pace from the stats anxiety. In addition to the courses, I also do research on motivation and learning and whatever stuff my students are interested in researching as well.
Yeah, because right now you have a student or 2, I think, that are doing something that's different in your research wheelhouse.
Yeah, so I have 3 independent project students right now, one of whom is helping me with some self-determination theory approach to teaching and need supportive teaching behavior. So that's the stuff that I am already interested in. But then with another student, we ran a study looking at how autism shapes perceptions of stimuli as potential job candidates, and so perceptions of traits and hireability. And then my other student and I are doing a qualitative look into something called gender vagueness, which is the intersection of autistic and trans or queer gender identity.
Wow.
So
okay.
It's been learning lots of things and learning lots of new methods.
Yeah. I don't think I knew the last part of that. I think I just was seeing the qual questions as they are on the social media. That's really cool. Gender vagueness. I'm going to add that to my compendium here. Will?
Yeah, so I'm also a teaching professor, also trained in social psychology. That's where we met, was in undergrad. So not undergrad. Wow, it's all running together. Clearly.
Exactly.
We haven't known each other quite that long, but in grad school at UCSB, where we also know Alex from. So Molly and I were social psychologists there. And so I teach after she's whipped them into shape in stats and methods. I get them in the upper level fun courses. I get to teach health psychology, positive psychology, attitudes, and organizational behavior. So all of those kind of have different intersections focusing on well-being, how diversity, attitudes,
motivation.
Else? Yeah, and how that intersects with the body too. So I get to talk about mindfulness in every class, basically. It relates to every topic.
I am excited. I'm teaching health psychology again next year. It's been, I guess, 3. My rotation got a little messed up because of the pandemic. But yeah, it was the last time I taught it was that semester, that fateful semester where we all had to go home back in 2020. So it's been a while. I mean, it was a really good time to teach health psychology, I suppose. But I'm excited to do it again. So yes, love it. I love having you guys on. I love seeing you too. Your faces. I miss your faces. So good. I get to see Molly not next month, the month after in Chicago. It's great. Okay.
Well, don't forget about our special guest.
Yes, our special guest. That's right. Thank you. Before we shift to the movie discussion.
We do have a special guest. This is Dr. Gordon Gale. He's a professor of positive psychology, among other things as well. But he comes with me to all the courses and teaches.
Yes, he is probably the best TA.
And I guess he didn't say, yeah. And I guess he didn't get a chance to say that with me, he also helps with our research as well. And so there, my focus is on, well, I guess a number of things, but mostly taking a self-determination theory approach to a number of questions, from education related things to social support, especially around stigmatized identities and relevant to what we're talking about today, LGBTQ stigmatized identities. And so that's part of one of Gordy's expertises too.
Yes, his expertise is much, much appreciated and much needed.
Well, and so to be clear for the listening audience at home, Dr. Gordy is a little 16-pound-ish
Chihuahua.
The pandemic was hard on him.
It was hard on all of us. Chihuahua Dachshund something mix, and he's the best little TA.
Oh my goodness, TA. He is, and he has the best. I think, actually, I do actually think it's my favorite. Don't tell Astrid. Instagram account. What is that Instagram account?
Find him at Dogtour Gordy. DOGTOR GORDIE.
Oh, it is very much worth it. Okay, so let us pivot now to the movie discussion, which is why you both are here. I called, but I'm a cheerleader and indie sleeper in the intro because I wrote it here. I don't know if I don't even know if it even rises to that level. I'm looking at.
I don't know what that means.
It's like so it's an independent film, and it was sleepers generally are hits though, right? So it's something that kind of goes under the radar.
I mean, does it have to be a wide hit though, right? Because it's definitely a cult classic.
Would you consider it? Yeah, so that was my sort of question to myself in the intro. Would you consider it a cult classic?
Absolutely.
It's a specific. Okay. I would call it specifically a lesbian cult classic.
Okay, that's probably why it never came across my radar, and that makes a lot of sense, right? And it really is an interesting, I guess, flip for Natasha Lyonne to go from American Pie to this movie, because essentially, I think that American Pie came out in 1998, and this was 99, so she just like went whoop and flip that one. So, literally. So, I wanted to give both of you sort of the moment to give your thoughts on the film in general, sort of where you're coming from with this film, because Will was the one who suggested it, and I had never seen it. So it was... I'll just briefly say that I enjoyed the film very much. So I want to go ahead and let you both have the floor.
All right. So, yeah. So as Alex said, I picked this. When I was picking a film, I was kind of racking my brain to think of one that, would be good for us to talk about, would have some sort of meat to it for us to discuss, but also one that was personally meaningful. And so, we had been joking that this hadn't come across your radar because in part it is specifically a lesbian cult classic, and sort of like the main character that we'll talk about more coming up, who doesn't really takes other people to help notice that she has a different identity. And when other people noticed that I might be different, this was a movie that they suggested that I watch when I got to college, and people in my hallway were like, oh, you look like you should watch this movie. And so I watched this movie, and it was part of the second time that I came out. And so that was part of that process.
Excellent.
So I think that you should maybe expand a little on what you mean by coming out.
Okay. So yeah, so this is kind of like our positionality statement here, I guess. So I am coming to this as a trans man now, but at the time that I first came into this movie was coming out as a lesbian. And so, that's not the necessarily the path that everybody takes, but I went through a few different times of coming out, first as bi, then as lesbian, and then as trans. And so that's where I've landed now. My mom likes to joke about, when am I going to come out as something else? But you never know.
Excellent, Will. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and so I had not watched this movie until Will shared it with me as a meaningful part of, his college experience and identity development. And I absolutely love it. I mean, first of all, it's bubblegum satire. I don't know if you read much about the film, about like the director talking about it, but the aesthetic she was going for was a mix of Barbie's Dream House and Edward Scissorhands.
I can see that.
Is how she describes the look, right? Which I think is just absolutely perfect. So I really like those like bold, weird visuals. And the cast is just absolutely phenomenal. But one thing that Will didn't mention is that we both also come from a gender studies background. So we're both social psychologists. I was a women's studies minor in college. Will went to Smith College, which is a women's school, and did what did they call it there? Was it gender and sexuality studies or something to that effect?
SWAG, study of women and gender.
There we go. That nice recursive acronym there.
Yeah. So, Will has the personal attachment, but we both have intellectual and academic interests in the important topics in this movie as well.
Well, I appreciate you both stating your positionality on that. My positionality is of someone I would consider myself an ally to the queer community and a lover of satire in all of its forms. So that's my positionality for this film. And I always love a film that knows what its message is and does so effectively. Because there's a lot of films out there. We'll call them movies in this case, film versus movies, where it's just like you can be mindless on it and it's fine. There's no issues. It's just somebody's idea of comic book art. You probably know which movies I'm talking about there. But films that do this and have a message and do that message effectively, even if it's only at the large end of 80 minutes long, I think that's really good, right?
Well, in addition to having some really smart, thoughtful things to say and a clear message, it is just also fun. And it's just enjoyable, right? It makes you feel good. So, the main character, Megan, who we'll talk more about, she's a cheerleader and she loves being a cheerleader. And she says, it's not supposed to be intellectual. It's just supposed to make you feel good. And I think that this movie overall has a little bit of that
that's
too.
very true. And before we jump into like some of the more nuanced stuff that have like specific scenes or even specific moments, I think the overarching idea about this film is its commentary on a really tough topic, a really heavy topic, and that is conversion therapy. Did you want to say something about conversion therapy for the listeners?
Yeah, just that. I'll go first, and then Molly can give us a little bit more of the history about that. But just that, right? So this film is very light in its portrayal of a very heavy thing, and that it was intentional, right, by the director, was to show a fun, flourishing story of our community, but also cover a difficult topic. And so, just we want to note that if this is something that hits close to home, because it does for many people, this is something that's still very much alive, even though this film was 23 years old now. This issue is not old. It's very much currently in the news, and so it's still affecting people's lives. And so if you're not ready to laugh along with us at this portrayal of it, not at the concept in general, but then maybe this isn't the episode for you. But
yeah, well said. Well said, Will.
And so because it's satire, I think it allows us to talk about some really dark things that we might not be able to do and we in the overall portrayal of conversion camp, or like a reparative therapy camp overall, but also some of the particular character quirks, like the lesbian who's into pain, for example, that the satire allows us to talk about some of the really scary pieces of it, but it is still very real. And so, like, just to be clear, we did a little bit of research. So this is as of yesterday.
Yes, I love that kind of research.
Before recording. So March 30th, 2022. Conversion therapy is still legal in the UK. A few years ago, they came very close to ending conversion therapy, but ended up not passing it. And it was really controversial. There was this big, like, gender affairs committee that people resigned over it. There were major debates about it. People were acknowledging that religious exemptions to a conversion therapy ban would be reasonable as recently as last year. And actually, just today, some document leaked from the UK government saying that they were still not going to ban conversion therapy. And then the internet exploded and they had to backtrack. But so, like, this is still a very contentious thing. In Australia, it's state by state, but it's still legal in many states in Australia. It's state by state in the US. So it's banned in California, Colorado, Connecticut, Maine, Maryland, and Delaware, a handful of other states, as well as DC.
I believe Illinois is on that list as well.
Illinois?
I'm
awesome.
pretty sure.
It's 21 states total.
I'm pretty sure Illinois is on that list. Just because we're a blue oasis, really, right now.
Lucky jerk. Canada just banned it in December of 2021. New Zealand just banned it last month. And out of the rest of the world, as far as we can find, Brazil, Ecuador, Germany, EU, and Malta. So the vast majority of countries, it's still legal.
And just to be clear, like in the UK, they're saying they might now pass it, but that would only be for orientation and not for gender identity. And so that's also in some places still on the table, even if other bans are in place. If they're only for sexual orientation, they may not apply.
Right. That's critical to note, because you could see a camp. You could see these camps working under the guise of one because they can't do the other, but still operating.
Yeah. And it was only very recently that, medical professionals themselves stopped doing that, having these kind of reorientation for gender types of trainings and treatments.
Well, and again, to be clear, they're not all done. No. There are still very prominent therapists and sex researchers who still promote reorientating, as one of the characters says in the movie, reorientating therapy.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I chuckled at that one.
True directions.
Exactly.
So all that to say, it's a really funny movie, and we're gonna laugh a lot about it.
As I just did.
It's about a very serious thing, and I don't want to undermine that.
Megan, we love you. We all love you. And lately we've become concerned about certain behaviors. We're afraid you're being influenced by a way of thinking, and unnatural. Do you remember the woman on TV?
Honey, we think you're a lesbian.
I myself was once a gay. Now I'm an ex-gay, Megan. I work for a place called True Directions, who help people like yourself learn to understand the reasons behind homosexual tendencies and how to heal them.
What tendencies? Why would you think
You've been trying to make us eat this tofu.
In diet, watch for a switch to vegetarianism.
You don't have any pictures of guys in your locker, just these.
These.
Sexual, even vaginal motifs in artwork and decorating. Gay iconography.
You don't even like to kiss me.
It's true.
I can't believe this.
Denial is a normal part of the healing process that we'll explore at true directions.
Healing?
Like rehab, honey. Homosexuals Anonymous.
Poodle, it's only for a few months.
There is no way I'm going.
Okay, so let's jump to talking about the various aspects of the film. We can get a little deeper into some of the themes and topics that we just mentioned. But before we do, I want to give a brief synopsis of the movie. So Megan, played by Natasha Lyonne, is the main character, and she is a cheerleader at a high school, has a boyfriend, and in the first 5 minutes of the movie, the setup of the main identity issue in the whole movie and the evidence for her going to this camp happen in like that first 5 minutes. So shows her kissing her boyfriend, having pictures of women in her locker, and really awkward family pray time. Grace is what it was. And then for the rest of the movie, she's at this camp that is supposedly a program to re-stratify people through 5 steps, a 5-step program, a nod to the Alcohol Anonymous 12-step program. She goes through that program, meets another woman who is also a camp member, and they fall in love and have a sexual encounter in the camp, and happy ending. They both leave the camp and lead their lives as a couple. Is that a pretty good synopsis?
I think that it's the major points.
I left a lot out. So I left a lot out and was purposefully vague so we could jump into the more graceful ways of saying these things in context. So Megan, she's a cheerleader. Why did they give this character a role of a cheerleader? Is my first question.
Yeah, so I mean, I happen to know that the director wanted to have a femme portrayed lesbian. That's often not the case in films. There's not that many films about lesbians, especially then. But in many of the ones there were, they may have started out femme, but then by the end give that up, cut their hair, kind of ride off into the sunset on their motorcycle. Which, not that there's anything wrong with that. But that doesn't have to be the journey, that she could be both a cheerleader and feminine, but also be a lesbian. And so that was part of the goal in having her be that.
And you're right. And even when lesbians are portrayed in films that are not ostensibly about sexual orientation, they're just stereotypically portrayed in most film as a butch lesbian, right?
Yeah.
So that's really cool. I didn't know that. So Molly, let's talk about your ideas on gender and sexuality in this movie, and then I'll get your take on this.
So there is so much to say about this, but I think the organizing principle of this movie is a total conflation of gender and social roles and sexual orientation. And to be fair, that is how a lot of people think about them, right? That the lesbians are more masculine, are butch, because there still has to be a masculine and a feminine person in each relationship. And that if a man is effeminate, then that must mean he's attracted to men, right? So like people do conflate these things all the time, but we know that they don't have to go together. And so this really was an intentional choice, I think, of the director to be able to lampoon these misunderstandings and misconceptions about how gender and gender identity and social roles and sexual orientation are not the same thing. So we see this in a lot of ways throughout the film. I think one of the clearest ways is in the color scheme.
Yeah.
So once they're at True Directions, right, this camp, it's this old Victorian in the middle of nowhere. in the middle of like a brown dying field. And everything is super vivid. And the girls, right? So these are all teenagers. Their girls are put in all pink and skirts.
Yeah.
And their bedroom looks like something out of Barbie's dream house. It's all pink and sparkly. And the boys are put in all blue and they wear ties. And so, like, from the costumes that they're in for almost the entire film, they are just so totally polarized in pink is for girls and blue is for boys. We also see this in, some of the ways that they talk about how they're supposed to be. Everything is about learning your role. And so all of the camp activities are in learning the role of a woman in housework or having a child, or the role of the men in fixing cars and chopping wood. It's all about the roles.
Backwards and forwards and backwards. In a very clean line, you go in, go up, and you go up, and you go down. Girls, is everybody paying attention? And you go in and out, in and out, and in and out. Get into every little crevice. And in and out.
And you slip it in and out. And add a little more oil and shove it in. Take it out. Put some muscle into it. Shove it in and out. And shove it in. Take it out. Okay. Who wants to go down with me?
You're turning into a pretty young lady. Now hold still.
Come on!
And her parents are typically, that's what their dialogue centers around, her role. Yeah.
Yes, from the beginning.
In the very awkward Grace scene, that scene just goes on, and we all have the same sort of reaction as Megan does in that, and it's like, what is going on with my dad right now?
What are you even saying?
Will, what is your take?
I mean, similar, right? So that they're really setting up this conflation of these gender roles and sexual orientation, and playing with that and poking fun at that, and poking fun at that in the context of the attempt to convert them, but also just poking fun at those roles in general, and that kind of allows them to do that too. And so I think that that's a fun thing about it as well.
Yeah, and the roles, we'll say here the roles and the characters sort of kind of get molded into lampoons, right? So each character sort of plays a almost one-dimensional character on purpose. So who are these characters that Megan meets at this camp?
Well, so we've already talked about Megan, who is the pretty, blonde, innocent, naive Christian cheerleader. All of these things are very important to her identity. Her heartthrob is Graham. And I cannot think
everyone's heartthrob.
Everyone's heartthrob is Graham. Who is a little bit alternative, has a short, spunky haircut, and smokes cigarettes, and is kind of an androgynous dream to all of the girls at the camp. And let's see, we have Sinead, who is gay because she's from France. That is a line that she has. And she's the, like, also kind of alternative, dark eyeliner, black fishnet, into pain, right? That's like her character trait, is she's really into pain.
And then we have the woman from New Zealand, the young woman from New Zealand, and she portrays more of the goody two-shoes one who really wants this to work. She's kind of the leader. She helps Megan get settled there.
And then the last of the female characters, who I think is one of the most interesting, is Jan. So Jan is the super butch softball player and has short buzzed hair and has a little bit of a stash growing in and is just the super masculine and butch one. And I think that Jan is really important, first of all, because, spoiler.
Well, she has
about halfway through the movie, maybe a little bit more. She's like, but I'm heterosexual.
Right.
And no one believes her. And she's like, no, I really like balls. I like boys.
Come on, just throw out the first thing that comes to your head, okay? Just think.
I already did. Mine is just as good as anybody else's. I'm a heterosexual.
Not yet, honey. You're almost there. And don't speak out of turn.
No, I know. I've never been gay.
Jan, remember, you were molested. I mean, just take a look at yourself.
I mean, everybody thinks I'm this big dyke because I wear baggy pants, I play softball, and I'm not as pretty as other girls, but it doesn't make me gay. I mean, I like guys. I can't help it. I just want a big fat wiener up my... Amen, sister. I quit.
Who in the hell is she trying to fool? Hey, Jan! Jan!
And she says, just because I, play softball and wear baggy clothes and I'm not as pretty, that doesn't mean that I like girls. And so this is this real struggle for her, is that everyone told her that she's a lesbian. And she's just not. And I think what's interesting about that is, again, that's just a really good snapshot of gender is not sexuality. Right. And she is just that in a capsule. But I think it's also notable that this exists in a world, it seems to exist in a world without trans folk.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. That's a good point.
I mean, it makes a little bit of sense for 1999, again, given the context of queer representation in film at the time. But, if Jan were a character now, we might be talking about Jan as being non-binary or butch or trans and still interested in boys, that like gender identity and gender role and sexual orientation are all different. And this movie really distills it down to very clear, like, sexual orientation and social role of gender, and doesn't play around with any of the peripheries.
That's a really good point, because RuPaul is in the movie, and you're like, you see the name RuPaul Charles come up on the screen, and you're like, oh, somebody's gonna be, there's gonna be a drag character in this movie. But it's like you turn that completely on its head, to your point about representation in 1999, really delineated. We're really only talking about sexual orientation right now as sort of the thing different from the norm. But RuPaul doesn't play a drag character. RuPaul plays really himself at a moment when he's not in drag.
Well, and he plays an ex-gay, right? So he's a staffer. He said, the program works for me, and now I'm going to help the program work for you too.
Except that we watch him throughout the entire movie and can tell that it has obviously not worked for him, as he lusts over Rock, the son of the woman who runs the camp.
I love Eddie Ciprian.
And so it's just, you can tell that it hasn't worked. It obviously hasn't worked. And yet he's also clad in all blue and wearing a shirt when he first enters that says straight is great.
Right. And I wanted to make a note about the clothes being blue, and Molly did a great job of describing them. But I just want to add that the shorts that they chose for the men, the boys, are just really short. And I think for 1999, we're just too short for the conception of masculinity at that time. So it obviously plays into Mary Brown, the runner of this camp, not having a damn clue that her son is gay and how he rocks those damn short shorts. Of course. Of course Mike is going to just constantly watch that. I would.
So RuPaul is not a drag queen in this film, but still fabulous.
Yes, with a goatee. First time I've ever seen goatee. I that was what surprised me the most, seeing RuPaul there. Like, I'm not surprised he's on this, RuPaul's Drag Race, not in drag all the time. So obviously not shocked to see that, but the goatee. Because I don't think I can't even think about what RuPaul was in the 90s.
RuPaul played like characters in a lot of things. I think like it became a known figure when we were still too young to really
has it been that long?
But like I remember RuPaul being a guest character on like the Sabrina the Teenage Witch show,
right,
with Melissa Joan Hart, and played
so
a
already
on
famous
that, like,
because that's like stunt
judge,
casting,
right? Already famous, already a name draw in the mid.
Wow, I didn't realize has been that long, but okay, all right, time. Okay.
And so we did all the girls and their stereotypes. And so I know it's mostly focused on lesbians, and it is a lesbian cult classic, but there are young men who are sent to this camp too. So we've got Joel, who is, he introduces, so they all have to introduce themselves when they first get there. And they say, my name is, he says, Joel, and I'm a homosexual and a Jew. So he plays that stereotype. We have Dolph, who is
varsity wrestler.
Yeah, homosexual varsity wrestler.
Rufio.
Dolph. Then we have Yep. And then we have Andre, who is he's the stereotypical flamboyant. He introduces himself as actor, dancer, homosexual, and so and then we have lastly Clayton, who spends most of the movie in solitary confinement for hooking up with Dolph, but he's in retail, and he's the white, tall, blonde one.
Yes, played by Kip Perdue. Now I'm seeing he's been in a ton of stuff. He's got that face. Runaways most recently. Anyways, I have thoughts about solitary confinement. Do you mind if we take a digression into something that I've been talking about recently on the podcast, which is ethics? What?
Yeah.
The F. Don't swear on the show. That I know it was a gag, it was a joke, but I was like, wait, he goes to a literal doghouse
for like multiple weeks,
and they forget about him. Because I think he ends up spending time in there longer than he was supposed to. But oh my God, he's tall, too tall for that house.
Well, and so again, like to reiterate, right, he's sent to the confinement because he was caught hooking up with Dolph, but Dolph is totally kicked out of the camp altogether. I mean, that seems like a pretty good outcome, in my opinion.
Sure. I think Dolph lucked out and found the
XX gays
that live down the street and take in the XX campers, gay campers, or maybe I guess they haven't renounced their sexuality yet, so ex campers.
But like that's one of the things that we were alluding to at the beginning, that the actual things that go on in these like reparative therapy camps are atrocious.
Right.
And solitary confinement, which is cruel and unusual punishment and an extreme form of imprisonment in most contexts, is an actual, behavior modification tool.
Right.
Another thing that comes up pretty early on is aversion therapy, where they associate anything that is desirable with electric shock. Now, the joke is that it's the girl who is into pain who is like using this buzzer to masturbate. So like you can laugh at it a little bit, because otherwise how on earth could you laugh at that? Right. And aversion therapy is a part of reparative therapy in a lot of cases.
Exactly.
And so these are ways that these really horrific things that are based in reality are kind of poked fun at in this world.
Yes. I think talking about, I forgot the name already, Clayton having to go to the doghouse is actually an important point to make, because, you know, that seemed, in the context of the satire, to be the most ridiculous thing. And ridiculous to the point of absurdity, right? Because they're like, oh, Mary has to go and get him out of there, and frantic and all of that stuff. You're going to be in the graduation with Graham or something like that. But really, everything else is far, far worse cumulatively, right? Because it's just one day after the other of doing this program with all of these terrible things, and it just kind of adds up. But the farce is the doghouse, the literal doghouse. We are going to continue this conversation after a quick break with Doctors Molly Metz and Will Ryan. Stay tuned for more of that.
Howdy. Thanks for listening to this episode. We hope you're enjoying the conversation. Over the past 2 years, the podcast has grown, and that's mostly in part to folks like you, the listeners. We've also had wonderful luck receiving support from the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, APA Division II Small Partnerships Grant. It's been a fun ride, and we want to keep it going. So we need your help. There are several ways that you can support this show. You can share episodes with your social media networks so we can grab new listeners. You can join our fledgling Patreon program. You can contribute directly using PayPal. Or you can purchase some sweet merchandise with our logo at our Spreadshirt merch store. All of those things can be found on the website cinemapsychpod.swanpsych.com. But perhaps the best thing that you can do is to keep listening and leave us feedback on Facebook or Twitter so we know you've listened. Thanks. And now back to the show.
And we are back talking But I'm a Cheerleader with Doctors Molly Metz and Will Ryan. So we were discussing, you two, the characters in the film, but we haven't really spoken that deeply about the main character, Megan. So we mentioned her characterization sort of broadly at the top by saying that she's represented as a more feminine lesbian in the movie, and that it was important within the context of film history and portrayal. But there is another characterization that's pretty central to her character's identity, and that is Christianity. So, Will, why is it important that she was a devout or faithful Christian in the movie?
I mean, I think it's important for a couple of reasons. One, it relates to the fact that a lot of this reparative and therapy happens in the context of religion, often Christianity. I certainly remember resonating a bit with her character when I first watched this movie, because not that my parents were particularly conservative themselves, but I was around a lot of other people who espoused those kind of beliefs. I hung out in evangelical churches and youth groups, had a pretty similar cross necklace that I was wearing not long before I came out the first time, and things like, not that you can't do both, but that often, depending on which kind of circle you're in, those can really be antithetical. And so that's part of what she's coming into conflict with is you kind of were touching on that when you were noting how her father prays before dinner, that these are sacred roles. They're not just roles, but to them, they're really sacred roles that they need to take on. And that is really important, that it's not just that she's rebelling against social roles, but to them that they're also religious roles. And again, they play it light and quick, but it is a bigger thing. And even she writes a cheer at one point that's one to what is
5,
it?
6.
5, 6, 7, 8. God is good. God is straight. Right. And she's really like it's hilarious, but she's reconciling with like, how can I, be this thing that God didn't make? God is straight. We're made in God's image.
Right.
And so, but even this Christian cheerleader, right, is still vulnerable to gayness and to this thing, and they still have to protect her. And also just, again, resonated with the fact that everybody else knew before her, right? They have an intervention that they host for her because they can tell. There's all these external cues, right? It's often the narrative in stories about LGBTQ people is that, they come out or they know when they have a romantic experience with someone else. But her behavior makes her readable. So she has a Melissa Etheridge poster hung up in her room. And everything else is super girly, but she's got that. She's a vegetarian. She likes tofu. So they show her a bag of tofu to show as a sign, right? So she's got these different things. And so even as a femme, right, she can still be found out as this thing, but that she doesn't even know. They have to confront her about that for her to sort of put it together. So when you're around all these other people where it's so repressed and no one's talking about it, right? She thinks she knows she has thoughts about women, but she doesn't think that that's weird or not normal or a problem. She just thinks her boyfriend sucks at kissing. I remember thinking that too, but right? No, maybe you're just not that into him, and so she has to go through this reconciling that.
And I'll be I suppose tell the audience that I didn't actually see where that was going right away. I knew that it was eventually going to be that she was going to be at this conversion camp for being a lesbian, but I actually didn't see the kissing as like, I'm like, oh, after it happened, like, you're not very good at kissing or you're not into me. It's like, no, dude, you just are really gross at it.
Well, that's part of what's also being poked at fun at the whole time is that that heterosexuality may not be very pleasurable for women. Certainly not for teenage girls anyway, right? I'm not trying to say that broadly, but right, lots of like, I think back to my boyfriend in high school, like I wasn't into him, but also he was objectively bad at kissing. And so these two things can both be true, and it can certainly make it confusing.
Well, and so another place this comes in the movie is at the end, there's these like, they're toward the end, part of the program is these simulated sexual experiences. Mm-hmm. And they're in these like nude colored body socks, and they're simulating sex between the boys and the girls. And
with fig leaves over.
With fig leaves and flowers in strategic places.
Yep.
And again, like the Joel asks, Ms. Brown, like, what about foreplay? And foreplay is for sissies. Right? A real man just. And so like it's not implied. It's very explicit that sex in a heterosexual relationship is not for women. And so we see this come up a few times. Although to be fair, there is research that shows what's called an orgasm gap between straight women or women having sex with men and women having sex with women. Mm-hmm. So there is some research to back this up.
Now lean in and kiss her. Nice, Rob. Now feel how soft and vulnerable she is. Isn't it wonderful? Now Grump. Let him take the lead. Little tongue. He loves you. He wants to be with you the way God intended. To be inside you. His love muscle thrusting. Ugh. Cut. Very good. Okay, who's next? Okay, now remember that sex is fun. We're making love. There's nothing dirty about it. Sex is beautiful when it's between a man and a woman.
Mom.
Okay, now from this position, the woman will spread her legs, opening like a flower. That's wonderful, Graham. Now at this point, the man will insert himself into the woman. Yes, look, that's it.
Mrs. Brown,
What is it, Joe?
what about foreplay?
Well, foreplay is for sissies. Real men go in, unload, and pull out. Oh.
Yeah, and so what does Megan do at the end with her Christianity?
They don't really show her reconciling that in any way. She doesn't take her cross off at any point. She doesn't throw it out, but it doesn't. That doesn't ever seem to like be part of. They make the story more about figuring out with the parents, but they don't come back and address that again, which I think was interesting. Maybe if they'd had a longer movie, they could have done that.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a missed opportunity because it's so salient in the beginning of the movie, and then it sort of wanes as the movie goes on because the narrative does shift, right? It shifts away from Megan as an individual to Megan and Graham as a new thing, and the consequences of that. So before we move on to the consequences of that, the end of the film, I do want to talk about the program at this camp. As I said earlier, I'm going to bet with the way they characterized Kathy Moriarty's character, excellent, as I said at the top of the show, excellent casting on this. If you watched Casper, the Friendly Ghost. But they go to great lengths to, at least in my opinion, to make Mary Brown a sort of grifter, in a sense, with this therapy. Like, what really does she have underneath as the foundational component of this, other than just like making stuff up to make money?
I don't know if I'm with you on that.
Okay, well
I don't know.
I will. But hang on that one. For a sec. So she creates a 5-step program. And as I said a few minutes ago, this is essentially a play on the 12-step program. Which is problematic.
The author, the director, her mom ran a 12-step program. So it was directly based on that. She grew up around that and was like, oh my gosh, I need to make this into my movie.
Which makes a lot of sense because it is also a problematic solution to addiction in general, and also has tinges of religion underneath, right? So, okay, we'll go through the 5-step program, but Molly, go ahead. I don't know, you were saying you don't agree with my read on Mary Brown's characterization.
I agree that she's absurd and she's set up to be ridiculous and unlikable. That's clear. I don't know if I would classify her as a grifter, though, because my understanding, my schema for grifter is no true belief, right? Mm-hmm. Just trying to get the money. And I'm sure that she gets a lot of money for, like, people pay a lot of money for these types of camps. But she definitely doesn't have any training. She's not a therapist. She doesn't have any expertise. But there isn't really anything that makes me think that she doesn't desperately believe everything that she's doing.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that part. I think, yeah, she's in it. It seemed like to me that that's what it was. But I see your point. I do see your point. So the 5 steps. Will, what are the 5 steps?
Step 1. It comes across the screen in very campy letters.
Right.
Very, very 80s, 90s letters. And so step 1 is admitting you're a homosexual. And so they all do that.
In one group setting, by the way. Not a lot of therapy going on.
No. So then step 2 is finding your root, which is the cause of their homosexuality. They have to dig deep, and figure out what, caused this. Where was that tipping point, that turning point in their lives that led them to be homosexual?
Down this path.
Okay, then. Who's left to report out their root? Andre?
Shit, Miss Mary, I ain't the only one who don't got no root.
Andre, we don't use profanity or double negatives here at True Directions. Okay, who's next? Megan.
Well, I've really been thinking, but I just can't think of anything.
I think our little prom queen is too afraid to disclose.
Oh, really? What's your root, Graham?
We're working on your issue here, not mine. You're deflecting.
Actually, I think it might be a great idea for Megan to be reminded of your root, Graham.
My mother got married in pants.
All right, let's see. Dolph.
Too many locker room showers with the varsity team.
Hillary.
All-girl boarding school.
Sinead.
I was born in France.
Clayton.
My mom let me play in her pumps.
I like balls.
Why, thank you for that, Jem. Joe?
Traumatic bris. So, yeah.
Step 3 is family therapy. So the families become a bit involved. Step
Very
4
briefly again.
Very briefly. Again, it's a short movie. Step 4 is demystifying the opposite sex. And the last step is simulated sexual lifestyle, which is what Molly was talking about with the body socks and the fig leaves and the blossom. It's all strategically placed.
Right. And I like how you also included the detail that these do scroll across the screen, because they're almost like chapters in the movie. So chapters of this multi-week camp. So let's tackle each of these, right? So the first one, admitting you're a homosexual. What is about this? What can we say about this?
So Megan was the only one that was presumably hard for. She arrives at camp a day late, so we haven't seen the other characters do this, but they tell us that this was not hard for them. They knew that was an easy step, but as we said, Megan has a hard time realizing that. She needs to be convinced. It all kind of comes crashing down on her when they tell her that other people don't have these thoughts and they are unnatural. And she thought that was this normal. And so now she has this realization and tears up and drools all over and says, "I'm a homosexual." And it's all very dramatic and everyone is gathered around. So it's a very well framed scene.
Exactly. And well shot, because the camera kind of is in the middle and sort of pans around, and they insert all of the images that we see as the audience even prior to this. It's a really well done scene. All right, finding your root, causes of homosexuality.
Right. So just going back to the age-old, trope, or the idea that there must be some reason, right? If it's something wrong, then there must be a cause of that wrongness. And so if we can identify that, then that is a way that we can help, right? Then heal that wound and fix this oddity. So they all have to dig down and find this root. And again, it's hilarious in the movie, this idea of having to find a reason for that, and the particular reasons they come up with are problematic. But the way that they're all stated is absurd and hilarious.
I mean, first of all, these are still like the common talking points. Like, what is it that turns someone gay? Whose fault is this? They're really common tropes. But also, what was just infuriating to me, and this is the stats prof in me, is that like, correlation is not causation, right? Like, there are plenty of girls who go to all girls schools and plenty of boys who are on boys swim teams and change in a locker room and are not gay.
And plenty of people who are French.
Right. Many of the inhabitants of France.
But and that's why it's just so absurd, because they're sitting around and they're having this serious finding your root discussion, and then they shoot, the camera turns on its little lazy Susan to Sinead, and she says, I was born in France. And then they just accept that as a legitimate root.
Right, because
everyone claps.
And that plays a lot of like really film history stuff, because all the avant-garde film and portrayals of people have come from France. It's good stuff. And the domineering mother one is portrayed in the movie between Mary Brown and her son Rock.
He's the heartthrob who dances and wears very short jean shorts and holds garden tools suggestively. And she is constantly berating him and belittling him. And, you can't even sip a drink right, chug it. Right. And so that is the personification of this domineering mother as causing this supposed defect in the child.
And that's the route that Megan ultimately identifies for herself, is that there was a 9-month period where her father was unemployed and her mom had to be the breadwinner, and that, therefore was the mom being the dad, and that has to be the reason, right? But you can see really she's just looking for anything non-normative in her life to blame that on, and that's the thing that they look for.
And they approve of.
And everyone
claps, and that gets the seal of approval from everyone, not just the other campers, but also the camp leader. Okay, third one. The brief family therapy session that was there. So I want to specifically ask the question that we talked about earlier, which was the roles thing. So this one is best summed up in that scene.
Family therapy mostly focuses on Graham's parents. They're mostly the center of that exchange. So all the parents are there. We hear a little bit of snippets of talk from the different ones, the different kids talking about their roots. But then pretty quickly, it's Graham's dad and her stepmom, who's much younger, and they are clearly very rich white people who have a house in Switzerland and send her to boarding school. But he very quickly is like, I can't be in a room with a bunch of, and then uses the F word to refer to the gay men, and gets really uncomfortable and says, I hope you're getting more out of this program. If you don't, you're not getting the trust fund, no college, no car, don't come home. And he storms out. And so that's kind of the first time you see that maybe Graham is not so, she has a very calm, cool, collected surface, and you kind of see that falter for a second.
Yeah, she loses a bit of her edginess.
You're oh yes, this is why you have that facade that you put on, because you need to be strong like that.
Yeah. That was a fairly raw moment.
Yeah. Well, I think that this is where, again, it's all very silly, and this is where it gets really sad for me for a minute, is when Megan's parents are there. And this whole time, their actions, their intervention, their praying for her, they're sending her to this camp has been shown as being out of love and out of concern for her. And they really believe that they're doing this out of love and out of concern for her, even if we could, find issue with their methods. And I think that she believes that they want what's best for her. And so she really is trying to work the program. But it's at this point where they come and they say, if you don't make this work, you're not welcome home anymore. Right. And I think that this is the first time she realizes that it's change or the highway, and that she wouldn't be accepted.
So the fourth step is demystifying the opposite sex. Hey, what is it about all of these things? What? Opposite sex? Who are these people?
From a different planet. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
Oh. Thanks, Molly.
Yeah.
All right. Next topic.
Clears that up for you.
Exactly. So what do we learn about the opposite sex in this movie?
So they do like they're all in a room and they get a like basically an old school projector presentation of this is what you should do when you're on a date, and look how they're standing, and he's touching her arm, but they're like totally ridiculous. Like it almost looks like someone has cut out of a magazine like a head and put it on the person and like made these really janky things, and that's what they're doing. And they also have some flashcards they practice with things, and they practice going on little dates and things.
But then this is also just where it also gets really sweet, and like the rom-com part is that while they're watching this film clip, this is what you do on a date, you see, Graham finally like softly touch Megan's arm for the first time, and she doesn't pull away, and then the really awesome soundtrack kicks in, and it's just like where the sweetness really starts to build.
Yes, it is a very and well-deserved sweet scene, right? Like it's not trying to be saccharine or anything like that. It's like a deserved sweet scene because we had just learned that Graham isn't as aloof as she makes out to be, right? There are underlying things, and Megan has had to deal with, the whole thing with her parents and possibly being unacceptable and unaccepted. So it was really well earned scene. Now, the fifth step, because this changes everything, don't we know? All you have to do to change your orientation is to just have sex with the opposite sex, right? That's all you have to do.
Just do it.
Just do it. It's Nike right there. Because sex fixes everything, right? We have no issues when people have sex in our society, right? It's just, It happens and everybody's like, this was good. There's a solid, firm handshake, and then you part ways. Right? Am I doing sex right?
Yeah. That's it. I mean, and that's basically how they show it. I mean, Rock is essentially doing push-ups on top of...
Yes, I noticed that. Completely in the wrong place.
Right, and Mary is clapping and saying, "Wonderful job, Rock." And so it's just even more absurd because not only are they doing this completely ridiculous, uncomfortable thing, but his mother is watching him.
Yes,
and celebrating
and instructing him on how to pretend to penetrate someone's flower.
Yes. That's why, dear listener, if you haven't seen this movie, go watch it now. It's on IMDb TV for free, at least in the United States. I don't know how you both watched it in Canada.
We own it.
Oh, you own it. Wonderful. Okay. So we've gone through the 5 steps. I think it's pretty clear that you can't really achieve spoiler alert. You can't really achieve the objective, the Mary Brown and the other family's objectives here of becoming ex-gay. I'm sorry, Mike, is RuPaul's character. You're not fooling anyone.
No. So I think really the one other kind of big thing we haven't touched on yet too much is the XX gays who live nearby.
Go for it.
So there's Larry and Lloyd Morgan Gordon, and they also are their own stereotypes. Very lovingly done, but one is a very large gay man and one is a very small gay man, and they both wear sort of gray camo with a rainbow flag on it. They're kind of militaristic almost-ish, but they're trying to provide another perspective, as they say, for the kids at True Directions. And so they paper airplane in some flyers so that they know to sneak out on a certain night and they can go with them to a bar called the Cocksucker to sort of learn what it's like to be gay. And so they are the sort of gay elders ushering the new generation in and trying to provide that for them.
Yes, and I love how at the end of, or toward the end of the movie, that they are brought back as a place where, because they're so near to the True Directions lot, that they're a place where people who quote unquote fail this program, get kicked out of this program, have a place to go if their family's not going to accept them. And that's an important thing to put in a movie like this, right? Because not only are we making fun of, this person, this whole process kind of thing, but also to really ground the point that even if you're going through this, you are not alone, and there is somebody out there that is willing to help you.
Well, and especially in marginalized communities, this idea of a chosen family is really important. And they have built, this home, and they take in these kids who have failed the camp and they aren't welcome at home anymore, and help them get on their feet. And so this idea, like Will said, of the gay elders taking them under their wing, not just showing them the nightlife, but like helping take care of them and modeling a really healthy, good relationship. There's a great scene at home where they start to have a fight, and one of them says very clearly how that made them feel, and then the other one acknowledges that and validates it, and then they make up. Like, it's a very healthy, lovely relationship, and I think that that's also a really nice thing to see.
But of course, because it's satire, they also do it over the top, so you laugh because it's also really cheesy.
yes, healthy but cheesy, right?
Yeah. So another thing I would say about this bar is that this is the first place that these kids have to go where they can really be like authentic and queer and together and out in public, right? So like they kind of, they have their friendships at this camp, but they can't really be themselves. They can't really be their whole selves. And so this is the first like gay space that they have. And I mean, that's a pretty accurate way, a pretty accurate depiction of queer spaces in our society. Even still, that like gay bars are where you go when you are learning what it's like to be a member of the gay community. And importantly, they're often gay bars. Lesbian bars are not as common.
Right. The bar is called the Cocksucker. It's clearly catering to one clientele, but that is the only space. And in fact, when they go back there a second time or something, they're like, well, where else would we go? Right. There's nowhere else to go be gay. And so there's so much that centers around drinking and that particular way of being in the world and being social that doesn't fit everybody. And so that's part of what Megan's struggling with, is she's like, well, I like Graham, but I also don't really drink, and I don't really want to be here, and I don't like this. So maybe this, like, being gay doesn't feel right either if this is being gay. And I think a lot of people have that, trying to reconcile that as well.
Yeah. Also weird that we're talking about teenagers going to a bar, right? In 1999, and that being the only place where they can be their authentic selves, and they really aren't, like, legally aren't allowed to be there. I don't drink.
They have the fake IDs distributed.
They did have the fake IDs. Yes, I do remember that. But it's still kind of awkward, and you almost, at least for me as a teenager who didn't drink, you sort of relate to that, like, it's sort of unfortunate that this is really the only place I can be to be myself, but I'm also not fully invested in this location because there are things that I don't like here. So it's not as comforting to others. I did want to make a point, and this just occurred to me, and maybe this was intentional or not, but because, Will, you mentioned that Larry and Lloyd are a sort of one-dimensional stereotypical elder gay couple, but I'm wondering if it was also important that they were a gay couple instead of a lesbian couple doing this.
I think maybe, often that's the stereotype that who would adopt the kids in the community might be the women, but I don't know that it's particularly atypical, because there's also a lot of chosen community centered around gay men too. So I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that.
It occurred to me because maybe they didn't want to have a lesbian couple take away from the two main characters as another lesbian couple. So really focus the lesbian couple on Megan and Graham.
When they also nicely contrast Mary, right? Mary is this really harsh, hyper feminine woman, and they are these two warm, loving, caring, supportive gay men. And I think that makes that, and Will said, they wear gray camo and she wears a pink power suit.
Right.
And so like it really just makes them the total opposite.
Okay, I can see that too. That makes a lot of sense as well. All right, so we have time for one more segment, and I think this fits with my use of films in class, which is to take the portrayal and apply it to films in general. And that's the idea of tropes. So there are a lot of movie tropes in these kinds of movies, right? But this one doesn't play into those tropes. So
pretty intentionally turns them on their head.
Yeah, so talk a little bit more about that.
So I think the first and the most obvious one, especially when it came out, was that it has a happy ending. They get together. Neither of them is dead at the end, which seems funny to say, but that is not a given. So many of the portrayals that are available, and especially that were available, where sort of end with someone being a victim of a hate crime or dying tragically for some other reason, and then we're left with that. And so
it has a name, right? It's the bury your gays trope, where gay characters cannot have happy endings.
Most notably in the 90s, Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we saw it in Buffy, right? Mm-hmm. With a tragic death. We saw it in a more recent show. I forget the name of the show, but there was this lesbian couple who they had built up for over a season, and then they finally got together and one of them died, right? Like that this is a very common path,
right?
That they can't have their happy ending. And so I think it was really, really meaningful to have her get her girl, and they'd ride off in the back of the truck into the sunset.
Yeah, because they ran out of film.
Well, and they literally have the sort of red sunset and the clouds painted on that back of the truck. So it seems very intentional that driving away with that painted there.
Yeah, so we are going to make this as literal as possible, which is I mean fits with the entire movie, right? No space or time is wasted in this movie.
Nothing is painted with a light touch.
Right. What other tropes does this movie avoid purposefully?
Well, so one of them is that the relationship between Megan and Graham is not subtext. They're not just friends who maybe are, maybe aren't, and their touches linger just a little too long, that they're very clearly romantically interested in each other. And there's conflict, and then there's a grand gesture, but they are the romantic center of the story, and they don't hide that under a supposedly platonic friendship.
Right.
Like the movie Fried Green Tomatoes, for example, which I was so upset when I finally read the book and was like, why was this not in the movie?
Right.
You only know that they are lesbians if you know that they are lesbians. And so this is not that, right? It's not hidden.
Right. What else?
It's also not got the psycho lesbian trope where this woman is crazy, and in fact maybe even her gayness is what's driving her mad and causing her to act wild in some way. We watch Criminal Minds, and they have an episode where that's the case, right? She's so in love with her friend that now she has to, right, kill this guy and do all this stuff, right? Because she's like repressed that, and now it's leaking out, right? And so that's another trope that comes up surprisingly.
I think she has
often.
other problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think another one that I really like is in the framing and the actual visuals of their relationship, that Megan and Graham and their romance and their physical relationship is the point.
Yeah.
But they're not objectified, and it's not filmed for a male gaze, right? So if you're familiar with, this idea of the gaze and Gaze, not Gays, and who someone is being seen by, like this is often seen in, porn analysis, right?
Yeah.
That pornography made for and by men focuses on genitals, whereas pornography that's for and by women tends to be not only more narrative driven, but also a softer lens and a focus on the hands and the lips and the face, not the bodies overall. And so like it really is a soft, lovely, romantic, and like they kiss and they touch, and it's not sensationalized or objectified in any way. And I think that's really lovely.
Yeah, I do agree as well. And there really aren't very many visuals in that way in the other parts of the movie either. There are quick shots of the cheerleaders. There are quick shots of cheerleaders' breasts for a real quick, like half a second, and twirling, in seeing the underskirt of them from the perspective of Megan's mind. Those are supposed to be for her. And then there's one more trope that you mentioned. Which one was that?
Just that this is not just a coming out story. A lot of films, and again, not that that's not a great thing. I do a lot of my research on coming out. It is an important part of experience, something we do over and over again, but it's not just about that, right? In fact, that's the very first step, is that they admit that they're a homosexual, and the whole movie takes place after that. It's not as if that's the final point in their story, and once they've done that, it's over. All of the conflict pretty much occurs after that point. And so that's a key part of it. And also just that non-queer characters are not the point. They are the main characters here rather than the side characters.
Right. I think you make a good point about that the story happens after the whole coming out thing. Even the conflict isn't about the coming out, right? It's about violation of camp rules for a good reason.
Right. It's a rom-com. Right?
Yes.
It's a satire and it's social commentary, but it's a rom-com. They're teenagers and they have crushes and they're just trying to figure out who they are, right? Like it is in some ways a very normal story. And I also think that makes it special.
Yeah, because it doesn't have to be something completely different from hetero movies of similar veins.
And the director said she wanted to make a gay Clueless, so it wasn't like she was necessarily trying to be that different. I'm not sure she achieved gay Clueless, but some of the color scheme might have been inspired.
So one last thing, I wanted to give you guys a chance to anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention on the show before we end our little conversation.
Yeah, so I guess the thing we want to end on is the end of the movie. I mean, besides they have a graduation, that's all very fake and plastic. Their clothes literally look like plastic, so you could really just see one more time how much of a charade this all is. But then, right, the credits roll. They've gone off into the sunset. The credits roll, but then you get sort of one of those cut scenes. I don't know what they call it. You're the film expert, but they show one last.
The epilogue.
Yeah, like an epilogue scene, and it shows Megan's parents at PFLAG, the parents and friends of gays and lesbians, and her dad says, "Hi, I'm Peter, and my daughter is a homosexual." And you see her mom in the audience is very embarrassed. She's all got like a scarf over her head, but they're there. And I think that's such an important thing. Again, like, not only are we not burying our gays, but we're giving our heterosexual characters some room for growth and changing their minds. And that even if your parents aren't on board right away, maybe they'll come around. And I think that was a pretty cool ending, and was definitely special to me when I was first coming out at various times.
Yes, and I will I just quickly add to that, that I think it's really wonderful that it's her dad that jumps up and says that, because of how they put the two of them together each time. She holds his hand during grace. He gives her a bunch of kisses and just awesome words when they visit at camp. And he's really not the one that says you're not going to be welcome if you're going to be like this. It's more her mom. So I think it's a nice touch at the end that it's her dad, and he's like ready to sort of be in this role.
Be her cheerleader.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, since that's what she was. I want to thank Doctors Molly Metz and Will Ryan. That is doctors, because they are both, I don't know if I've been saying that well enough, but I just want to make it very clear that these two people are both doctors for joining me today to discuss an important movie, I think, for exploration of topics that aren't generally well portrayed in other movies, but also satire, which is always a great thing, because I'm saying this now, without satire, but I don't want to be here anymore. So now here is the moment that you all get to plug whatever's going on in your worlds. So who would like to go first?
I mean, honestly, I think the most important thing we already covered at the beginning, which is follow our dog on Instagram.
Okay, yeah, that works.
Dr. Gordy. I also have joined the Twitter since the pandemic started, and have found an incredible social and academic community there. So you can find me at Metz Psych. But Will's an old, and he doesn't have Twitter. Sorry. His takes are just for us.
Exactly. But see, that's the beauty of it, right? He saves his takes, not for the Twitter pleb, but for the real people. So I definitely appreciate that. Will, do you have anything that you wanted to plug? What's going on?
No, nothing interesting. And yeah, it's I don't have any social media to follow me on particularly, so sorry.
Where can people find more about the work that you have done?
About the work I've done, that you can find on, I have to remember at willsryan.com.
Will S. Ryan. Yeah, I see. I got him, folks. He was going to say no, but I knew.
So I have a website. I won't respond to you on it. You can email me, I guess.
I mean, so I do want to add one more thing. It's not a personal plug, but given the topic of the movie and the topic of our discussion, the anti-trans and anti-gay legislation in the U.S. is it's a mess. It's a mess. Laws are being passed. I believe it was just yesterday that the Don't Say Gay bill was signed, which of course has more consequences for trans youth. Although we're not really talking about that. There's bills about youth participating in sports, that if you have any ounce of energy, any ounce of spoons left, find out what legislation is on the dockets in your state. Call people, write people. donate some money. There are real big threats to trans rights and gay rights in, many countries. And just because this movie was 23 years ago doesn't mean that it's history. So.
Well said, Molly. And I will, if you have any links for me, I'll link that with the thing too. So with the show. So send those to me, please. Well, it was really, really fun to see you both and talk to you at the same time. So I will see you both soon. Until the next episode, thanks for listening.